Hey everybody, Lawrence here at Dirty Basement Terrain coming at you with another one. Challenge pieces. I love doing them. They make me do stuff. They stretch my imagination to and get me to build stuff that I absolutely would never build if I didn't have a challenge to do. Now, this challenge that I built this piece for, which I'll show you in a minute, is called Barbecue Season. The basic point of the challenge was to do either fire or food or both. I decided to do both and make a small piece of scattered terrain that I'm calling fire roasted maggots. I never would have built this without a challenge. I may have done a campfire scene, but not with not with maggots roasting around it. But challenge pieces, they're really fun and really great to build. Now I'm going to run you through how I built this, but also I want everyone to consider try a challenge piece. It'll make you think of different things to do that you probably never would have, and you'll be really happy with the results. I am putting a link to the challenge down in the description. I think it's being hosted by Mike over at Nat One Videos. Also, Carl from Carl Makes Stuff is going to be hosting it as well. So I'm gonna put a link to both of their channels down below, but the challenge itself is on Not One Videos. But before we get started, I want to say a big thank you to Dungeon Matron, my patron. Your support actually really helps the channel, and I do appreciate it. All right, guys, let's get started.
Okay, my first thought is to use these dowel crafting sticks, but they're too big, so or too thick, so I'm just going to go with some toothpicks I have sitting on the table. And I'm going to use the X-Acto blade here just to rough them up a little bit and not make them look not quite so perfect. And here I'm grabbing some standard milliput, which is a 2-part epoxy putty, and laying out a piece of parchment paper to lay out what I'm going to be sculpting. Parchment paper is actually a good thing to use because it won't stick. But here I'm grabbing 2 equal pieces of the milliput, the same you would if you were using green stuff. But I'm going with the milliput because, well, it is softer and the cure dry time is a lot longer, so I have a lot more time to work. But here it's just a matter of mashing and mixing it up till, it's a solid color, like yellow. This can take a little bit, but it's better to take a few extra seconds of time mixing it up to make sure it actually is thoroughly mixed than spinning along and not. And here I'm actually using Green Stuff World's roller maker, the extra large size one. Getting small little balls and just rolling it back and forth in the roller maker. It's how I make my worms and maggots and grubs. You can actually accomplish the same thing by using a comb and laying the little ball on the parchment paper and then just gently rolling it on with the teeth of the comb. But I have this, so I'm going to use this. Alright, now that I got a maggot done, I'm going to gently wrap it around the top of the toothpick. And if you screw it up like I just did, no big deal. Just mash it back up and then hit it in the roller again. And there is a disadvantage of using the mill put. It's very soft and apt to tear. But again, see, hit it, threw it in the roller maker again, and I have my grub again, no problem. And gently roll it around the toothpick, trying not to lose the sculpting. And I'm sticking it in the foam so it's not. Now I'm making some firewood for the campfire. I'm using these little craft balsa pieces that are about the right size. But being that they're squared, I gotta round them off a little bit with the X-Acto blade. It's a pretty simple concept. If you want to, you could actually go out in the yard or your garden and use small sticks or whatever. But I didn't feel like going outside, so I went this route. And here I'm just cutting them in half because they were, well, too long. It'll make for an easier placement of the pieces for the fire. And here I've rolled up and used some DOS modeling clay for the actual fire pit itself. Wanted to use the clay to give some elevation for where the pit is actually going to be going. And I'm just smoothing it out and blending it more into the little base I have here. And now I actually want using some sculpting tools to actually put some lines and just the, you know what, I don't know what I was trying to do here, but I wanted to put a few lines and grooves into it. And this is a sculpting tool I got from the Dollar Tree. I think it was actually meant for fondant for cakes. And again, just using another sculpting tool from the Dollar Tree to put in some ridges and lines and blend it a little more into the base. And here I'm using my homemade texture paste and covering the whole thing with it just to give it more of an earthy look to it. I had decided the pieces of wood that I'm going to be using for the campfire just weren't quite good enough, so I grabbed this expensive scribing tool from the Dollar Tree. I guess that's what you call it. And just started to basically put in some lines on the small pieces of wood. And quick, easy, done. I forgot to hit the record button on my camera for this part, but as you can see, it's just basically a glob of glue in the fire pit itself, and then I put the small pieces of wood in a like star pattern, basically for a campfire. And here I am adding a second layer of wood for the campfire, basically in the same pattern, but or where there's small empty spaces in the first layer. I'm going for a full look, if that makes any sense. But just keep placing until, and you notice I'm not gluing yet. Here I am. I'm just putting a wad of PVA in the middle there, brushing it over the ends there in the middle. I'm not worried about how it's going to look because this part is going to be completely covered. And here I'm using Seraphim Sepia wash just to give all the wood some color. Pretty simple, and just blob it all on. And here I'm using a Null oil wash on the underneath the wood, just because, well, to represent like ash and stuff that's been burnt. And now it's time to make fire. I'm using a candle jar and I'm putting a line of hot glue and then teasing it up with the tip of the hot glue gun just to make, like the individual flames for the fire. Now you want to do 2 of similar size and then progressively smaller sets of 2. That way, when you'll see in the next step why. I would like to note that it's a good idea to don't use glass, like a glass cup, because that's really thin and it has the potential to crack. Now, a heavy jar, especially like for candles, they're meant to resist heat. So you're safe when you're using a jar, or even like, a mason jar or something, but a glass jar, and you'll understand why a glass jar in the next step. Okay, now it's time to start peeling off the pieces. Yeah, it can be a tiny bit difficult, but not that hard. Just peel them off with your fingernails. You want to make sure to keep the sets of similar size hot glue flames next to each other, just for simple and ease of assembly. Again, this is relatively easy to get. Yeah, some pieces may stick, but they can peel off later. Okay, now let's actually assemble these suckers. Start with the biggest pieces and work your way down. On the flat side, maybe put a little dollop of hot glue, or just use the tip to warm up the hot glue of the flame, and then stick the two flat sides together for the initial one. And then just slowly build out further and further, going from the largest pieces down to the smallest. This is not a difficult process. It may be a little time consuming, but it is, once you do it once or twice, this is actually really easy to do, and you'll get some pretty decent results. And of course, during this process, you are going to get some strings, but they pull off easy, no big deal. Once you got all the pieces together, squeeze it in pretty tight. And you're going to have fire. And here I am, just a tiny little bit for the last piece. Squeeze it together, make sure they all kind of line up. Boom, done. Putting it on the campfire just to see how it looks. Perfect. Now it's time to add fire to the wood. Now, some of these pieces were sitting up a little too high, so I just trimmed them off for the fire to actually sit nice. Okay, and yeah, that works. And the easiest way to attach hot glue flames to wood, use hot glue. And so you just put a good old wad of hot glue to the base and then mash it on. It ain't going nowhere. But to give it a little better look, I'm actually running a few like tendrils or whatever of fire or hot glue fire from the wood itself up the flames. That way it'll give it a better look rather than just a wad of hot glue flames sitting on top of the wood. It just looks better to me. And it doesn't take much effort. And now it's time to paint the flames. I'm using Army Painter's Speed Paint 2.0 with this. For the only reason is like I bought the mega set and I wanted to pop it up and finally use it. I don't remember the names of the colors, but basically yellow, orange, and red. Paint the base of the flames yellow and go to orange and then red. And the thing is, I'm not giving this a chance to dry in between colors. I'm wet blending this just to give it a more gradual, natural look to it. I used to do this with contrast paints, but again, I'm just using the speed paints because I needed an excuse to use them without actually having to paint them any. Honestly, I mean, compared from contrast to speed paints for this specific use, it works good. Because I have done flames this way before using the contrast paints. And again, if you wet blend it, like I'm doing here, it'll just give it a more fade and natural transition from one color to the other. And wet blending isn't this big deal. It's just for this purpose. It's just slap it on, really. Go a little bit into the previous color, and the speed paint just kind of naturally blends on its own. And of course with the red here, I'm actually doing a few little stripes down the side. And now I'm using a black just to, hit a few spots. Not a whole lot, just a few, black specks on the flames, like, ashes flying up from the wood. And here I'm drilling some holes for the stakes that the worms are on. And I'm using this tool just to widen the holes. I could have used a bigger drill bit, but honestly, I just didn't feel like switching the drill bits for my pin vise. That's it. Probably would have been easier to switch the drill bits, but I didn't feel like doing it. But again, doing it this way works fine too. And I just got to make sure the holes are big enough for a toothpick. That's why you see me test fitting the holes with that toothpick laying there. And here I'm just priming the stakes and the maggots with a white primer. You can do this with a rattle can easily enough. I'm just using my airbrush because, well, it's sitting within arm's reach, and it's easier than going outside and spray painting out there. For me, at least. So, I'm just airbrushing. And here I'm painting the stakes with some speed paint. I think the color is Satchel Brown. You don't have to use speed paints for this. I'm just using it because, well, like I said before, I was just looking for an excuse to use some of the paints out of my mega set. But you could even just use crap paint for this part. And here I'm using contrast Nasdrag yellow for the maggots or grubs themselves. It's my go-to color for grubs and worms and maggots. And now I'm putting the wooden stakes through the holes that I made. I'm using a dab of not hot glue, but wood glue, and then pushing it down through the holes until it's at the height I want. Now, with the way I'm holding, I'm being very careful not to stab my hand underneath because toothpicks got sharp points. You'll see what I mean in a second here. See how it pokes through? Yeah. If you do that like I'm doing it, just be careful. And then I snip off the parts on the bottom. Easy. Now here, I'm just using some of the texture paste that I used earlier to fill in the holes around the bottom of the stake there, so it just looks flat and even to the ground. And here I'm just dry brush, giving a light highlight dry brush onto the stakes themselves with some apple barrel territorial beige. Like I said, just to give it a little highlights to the stakes themselves. And now it's time to paint the ground itself. I'm going with my standard colors for ground. The base coat is burnt umber. Just a dark brown. Give it like 100%, 95 to 100% coverage. And making sure to get the edges of the base itself too. And here I'm giving an overbrush with some nutmeg brown, basically a mid-tone brown, to all the soils, basically like a 75 to 85% coverage. Just, like I said, this is a mid-tone overbrush. Now, I did forget to record the final highlight color, which was a light dry brush with some light mocha. But it was just basically a quick highlight light dry brush with a cheap makeup brush from Dollar Tree. You'll see the results of it at the beginning of the next step. And here I'm using some 50/50 watered down PVA, and I'm going to start adding flock. I just want the flocking on the dirt part, because if it was in the fire, it would be burnt. But this is a pretty simple and easy process, at least the way I do it. Just brush on all PVA onto all the spots, and I'm gonna sprinkle on from above. First, I'm using this is all fine turf from Woodland Scenics. The first one color is earth, and then I'm going to be using burnt grass, and then I'll be using yellow for a few highlight colors. Basically, I'm working it further out and out, or at least that's what I'm attempting to do. And here I'm just adding some grass tufts, some from Huge Miniatures, some from Army Painter. Just different colors of grass tufts, just adding it until I'm happy with how it looks. Pretty simple. Just grab them with the tweezers I got here, dip the bottoms in the watered down PVA I got there, and then place them where I think they look good. And here I'm using some pigment powder that I mixed up, dark, like slate gray, and hitting the firewood down there around the edges of the fire to make it look burnt. Pretty simple, pretty quick. And then I'll hit it with some IPA to lock it in place. Now I want to try some OSL with pigment powder. I basically used an orange and just started hitting various places that I thought the fire might highlight a little bit. And then afterwards, spray it with some IPA to lock it in place. And here are the pretty shots. I'm relatively happy with how this turned out. I love doing challenge pieces. It's fun. I never would have done this unless it was a challenge. And, here's the pics. Here's a pic with, some other projects. Because them worms be mad you're cooking their babies.
Hey everybody, if you made it this far, it means you watched the whole way to the end, and as always, I do appreciate it. Challenge pieces, I mean, they're weird sometimes, and I get some oddball ideas, but they're fun. So if you see a challenge, give it a whirl. I mean, the thing I like about challenges is they're not contests. You're not competing against anyone. You're just trying to come up with a build that fits the theme of the challenge, and that's it. It's not a contest. Challenges are fun, and they're not meant to stress you out trying to say, I gotta make something better than everybody else. No, you just have to make something that you like and show it off. So I hope you guys really enjoyed this, because it was a lot of fun for me. It's just a small, simple, little quick build, and I'm going to be putting it on the table eventually. Okay, guys. I hope you, like I said, if you like the video, hit the thumbs up. And if you want to see more, click subscribe. More art, as I always say, more art coming. But again, guys, just always remember, when you're building a piece of terrain, the only person you got to worry about is you, because it's your terrain.